I woke up to pounding, not knocking. Pounding. The kind that rattles glass and turns your stomach before your eyes are even open. By the time I stepped onto my porch, 3 men in matching navy polos were already standing where my fence had been at 7 in the morning. A flatbed truck idled behind them. Orange stakes were stabbed into the ground like warning flags. One of them held a rolled survey map under his arm. And my fence was gone. The rough cedar line my father and I set when I was a teenager, the line that had marked our boundary for nearly 3 decades, had vanished overnight. In its place stood a bright white vinyl fence shoved 6 feet into my yard. 6 feet of my land quietly absorbed before sunrise. Russell Whitmore stood beside it, clipboard tucked against his chest like this was a routine inspection. He didn't ask permission. He didn't apologize. He said, "We've corrected your property line discrepancy." Corrected. Like my land was a typo, someone fixed with a red pen. My pulse thudded in my ears. My father cleared this ground by hand in 1989. That fence had stood longer than most of the houses in Briar Ridge Estates. Russell gave me a thin, polished smile. "You'll find everything fully compliant now." Compliant with what? I didn't know it yet, but that morning wasn't about a fence. It was about who thought they owned my land. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fenceline Files Stories, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Caleb Mercer. I'm 42 years old, and the land under my boots has been in my family longer than most of the roofs in this neighborhood have been shingled. I inherited 2.8 acres from my father when he passed. He bought it in the late 1980s, long before Briar Ridge Estates existed. Back then, this stretch was open field and pine trees, no stone monument. No manicured entrance, no matching mailboxes or architectural review committees. Just dirt, sweat, and a handshake. Our house sits just outside the official boundary of the HOA. Close enough to touch it. Close enough to see their grand stone entrance every time I turn into my driveway. But not inside it, not governed by it. I pay county taxes. I follow county codes. That's where my obligation ends. 5 years ago, when Briar Ridge decided to build their oversized stone monument and waterfall feature, they approached me politely. Russell Whitmore had just taken over as HOA president then. Fresh haircut, pressed shirt, confident handshake. "We'd like temporary access along your frontage during construction," he said. "Purely for equipment maneuvering. We'll restore everything exactly as it was. Temporary." We stood right where the gravel meets the asphalt, and I shook his hand. No lawyers. No paperwork. Just neighbor to neighbor. I believed that meant something. Russell is the kind of man who measures life in straight lines and polished surfaces. Late 40s. Corporate consultant. Always talking about visual harmony and long-term value stabilization. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. His tone carries quiet assumption, like the world already agreed with him. From the beginning, I could tell he saw my place as an eyesore in an otherwise curated landscape. My barn is original cedar, weathered. Functional, not trendy. My fence is rough-cut wood. My mailbox is simple steel. None of it matches the beige and stone aesthetic of Briar Ridge. The first letter arrived about 6 months after the entrance monument was completed. It was polite. "While your property is not formally within HOA jurisdiction, we encourage alignment with community aesthetic standards to maintain overall property values." Encourage. That word showed up a lot. Encourage me to repaint the barn in neutral earth tones. Encourage me to replace the fence with vinyl for visual continuity. Encourage me to install approved landscaping along the frontage. I ignored the first few letters. Then came comments in passing. At the mailbox cluster, a neighbor mentioned, "Russell just wants everything to look cohesive." At a cookout, someone joked that my place was the last holdout from the old days. It was always said with a smile, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. I started noticing the way cars slowed when passing my fence, how people would glance at the barn like it was something unfinished. Not wrong, just inconvenient to the picture they wanted. There were whispers too. Russell had fined a couple down the street for leaving a boat visible from the road. forced another family to replace their roof early because the shade didn't match approved guidelines. People complied. They grumbled quietly, then paid up. Property values were the sacred word in Briar Ridge. Everything revolved around it. And I understood that fear. Most of these families stretched to afford their homes. They wanted stability. They wanted protection. They believed the HOA provided it. But protection has a way of becoming control if no one questions it. Russell would occasionally stop by under the pretense of friendliness. "Caleb, ever thought about updating that fence?" he'd say casually. "Vinyl would really modernize your frontage." Or, "We've had some feedback about sightlines near the entrance. Your current layout disrupts the visual flow." Visual flow. Like my land was a design flaw. I'd remind him politely that I wasn't part of the HOA. He'd nod, smile, and say, "Of course," just offering suggestions. Suggestions started to feel like pressure. Pressure started to feel like strategy. About a year ago, he floated the idea that I could voluntarily annex into the HOA. It would simplify things long-term, he said. We could ensure uniformity. Uniformity. That word told me everything. I declined. After that, the tone changed subtly. Not openly hostile. Just colder. Letters became more frequent. The language more technical. References to surveys and frontage alignment began appearing. And then came the envelope. Certified mail. I remember the weight of it in my hand. The official stamp. The return address from Briar Ridge Community Association. Inside was a formal notice stating that a revised development survey had identified a boundary discrepancy along my frontage. According to their documentation, my fence encroached into HOA common entrance property. Encroached. They claimed it would be corrected within 72 hours to ensure compliance with approved subdivision infrastructure. I read that line twice, then a third time. 72 hours. Corrected. Like they were doing me a favor. I stood at my kitchen counter staring at the words, feeling something cold settle in my chest. They weren't suggesting anymore. They weren't encouraging. They were moving. I remember staring at that line thinking, they wouldn't dare. I drove straight to the Briar Ridge HOA office the morning after I received that certified letter. It sits inside a renovated model home near the entrance. White columns, manicured shrubs, a bronze plaque that reads, "Community Standards Preserve, Community Value." Russell was already waiting. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked prepared. Denise Holloway sat beside him at the long conference table, laptop open, glasses perched low on her nose. Where Russell's demeanor was polished and diplomatic, Denise's was sharp, precise. The kind of woman who counts pennies in silence and remembers every slight. Russell slid a large document across the table toward me. "A revised development alignment survey," he said smoothly, "conducted last month." I unrolled it. Fresh ink. Crisp paper. Red lines marked across the frontage of my property like surgical cuts. "You'll see here," he continued, tapping the corner with a manicured finger, "that the original 1989 plat appears to have been improperly measured along the road frontage." Improperly measured. My father spent weeks with county officials verifying those boundaries before we ever built that fence. Russell leaned back. "This correction actually improves your frontage alignment. It brings continuity to the entrance corridor." Improves. Improves for who? I asked. "For the community as a whole," Denise replied before he could answer. Her tone carried no warmth. "The entrance expansion project has already been approved by the board based on this alignment." "Expansion?" I said. Russell nodded. "We're enhancing the monument. Larger stonework. Extended landscaping. A water feature upgrade. It elevates property value for every homeowner. Every homeowner except the one whose land they were taking." "And if I don't agree?" I asked. Russell's smile thinned. "Then we'll have no choice but to pursue enforcement under civil obstruction statutes," he said calmly. "Interference with community infrastructure development can carry financial consequences." "Financial consequences," Denise added, "including recovery of associated costs." It was delivered like a business memo. not a threat. Not technically, but it was a threat. I looked at the red line again. Their revision didn't just move my fence 6 feet. It shifted the entire entrance, monument footprint deeper into my land. You filed an easement? I asked. There was a pause. Russell adjusted his cuff. The revised survey establishes the proper boundary. That renders an easement unnecessary. He said it like it made sense. They hadn't filed anything. They hadn't recorded any modification with the county. They simply declared the line moved and assumed I wouldn't challenge it. Outside the office, I ran into Marcus Bell. He lives 2 houses down from the entrance, close enough to hear every board meeting rumor. He lowered his voice when he saw me. "Caleb, I don't think this is right," he muttered. They rushed that survey through. Nobody saw full documentation. Then why didn't anyone object? I asked. He glanced toward the office window. Russell doesn't take dissent lightly. That told me more than he realized. When I got home, I called my sister Erin. She's always been the steady one between us. "Don't go in hot," she warned after I explained everything. "If you escalate emotionally, they'll paint you as unstable." "I'm not emotional," I said. "You're furious," she corrected gently. "And they're counting on that." She was right. This wasn't about yelling. It was about positioning. Still, the absurdity gnawed at me. They cited aesthetic continuity as justification for redrawing a legal boundary. They spoke about visual flow, as if that outweighed recorded deeds. They framed land ownership like it was adjustable, flexible, negotiable. And underneath it all was one clear assumption. I was one man. They were an organization. I would fold. 2 days later, another certified envelope arrived. This one was thicker. The language was firmer. Failure to comply with the revised alignment correction may result in formal civil action and recovery of damages incurred due to obstruction of community branding initiatives. Branding. I read that word 3 times. Branding. They weren't protecting infrastructure. They weren't correcting error. They were protecting an image. And my land didn't match it. They were branding my land. The stakes showed up first. Bright orange, hammered into the soil like warning flags. At first, there were 2. Then 4. Then a full line cutting deeper into my yard, each one positioned with deliberate precision. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't signed a single document. Yet every morning, there seemed to be more plastic markers creeping inward like slow-moving teeth. 3 days later, a landscaping crew pulled up without notice. No knock on my door. No courtesy call. They stepped out of their truck with measuring tapes and spray paint, walking my frontage as if it were already theirs. I confronted the foreman. He shrugged and said, "We were told this boundary's been corrected." Corrected. That word again. When I told him they were trespassing, he made a call. 5 minutes later, Russell's SUV rolled in. He didn't argue loudly. He didn't need to. He just stood there calmly and said, "We're operating within revised survey guidelines, Caleb. There's no need to create a scene." Create a scene. As if protecting my land was theatrical. That evening, I checked the Briar Ridge community social media page. I'd never joined it, but Marcus sent me screenshots. Certain neighboring properties are currently delaying necessary entrance improvements that benefit all residents. Community growth should not be obstructed by outdated individual resistance. Outdated. Resistance. They never used my name. They didn't have to. By the end of the week, someone anonymously reported my barn for code compliance review. Said the structure appeared structurally inconsistent with surrounding development. 2 days later, a county inspector showed up at my gate. He looked uncomfortable. "I've got a complaint on file," he said. Routine inspection. He walked the perimeter, checked the foundation, the roof line, the permits on record. Everything was compliant. When he left, he shook his head slightly. Some folks got too much time on their hands. But the message was clear. They were probing. Testing. Pushing. The following Monday, I attended a board meeting. The room was packed. Not because of me. At least not officially. The agenda listed Entrance Enhancement Update as the primary item, Russell stood at the front with a slideshow presentation behind him, renderings of an expanded stone monument. Wider landscaping beds, decorative lighting extending farther down what used to be my frontage. He clicked to the next slide, a subtle aerial diagram. There it was. My property line shifted inward. We are addressing a minor boundary correction that allows us to optimize visual continuity, he said smoothly. Unfortunately, there has been some resistance. Denise stood next. Non-cooperation with approved development improvements can negatively impact community valuation, she added. We must consider collective interest. A few people nodded. A few clapped, not loudly. But enough. I stood up. My property predates this subdivision, I said evenly. There is no recorded easement. There is no filed modification. Russell tilted his head slightly. Caleb, this isn't personal. It's progress. Progress. That room felt smaller than it was. Eyes on me. Not hostile. Not supportive. Just cautious. Nobody wanted to be next. When I left, Marcus caught up with me outside. This is getting ugly, he said quietly. Ugly didn't begin to describe it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every set of headlights that slowed near my driveway made my jaw tighten. Every engine that idled too long made me step to the window. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. They were isolating me, framing me, turning one stubborn landowner into a narrative. By midweek, trucks were back. This time, not just measuring, digging, reinforcing the stone monument base. I walked out to the frontage and stopped cold. They had extended the foundation forms beyond where my fence used to stand. Beyond the 6-foot line they claimed, concrete rebar cages were already set in trenches carved into my soil. I didn't argue this time. I went back to my garage and pulled out the original survey plat my father kept sealed in a plastic sleeve. I found the original corner pin, still buried beneath decades of grass and packed earth. I dug carefully until I exposed the metal marker. Then I measured. Once. Twice. 3 times. From the original corner pin to the outer edge of their new reinforced monument foundation. The numbers didn't lie. They weren't 6 feet over. They were 12. I didn't go back to the HOA office. I went to the courthouse. The county records building smells like paper and dust and patience. It's quiet in a way that feels permanent. Nothing flashy. No renderings. No visual continuity. Just documents that outlive arguments. Marla Reyes has worked land records for 22 years. She's the kind of person who doesn't rush and doesn't guess. When I told her what was happening, she didn't react with outrage. She reacted with procedure. Let's pull the original Mercer plat, she said calmly. We spread the 1989 survey across the large wooden table. My father's name was printed at the bottom in faded ink. Bearings, distances, corner pins, road frontage clearly marked. Then she pulled the 2007 Briar Ridge subdivision filing. We overlaid them. Line by line, measurement by measurement. Marla leaned closer to the screen and adjusted the transparency layer. There's no amendment recorded to your boundary, she said. She searched the digital index. No easement filed in favor of Briar Ridge Community Association. She searched again under cross-reference. No right-of-way transfer. Another click. No boundary modification approved. She sat back slightly. Mr. Mercer, she said evenly, according to county record, your property line has not changed since 1989. I swallowed. And the monument? I asked. She zoomed in on the overlay. The stone entrance footprint sat 12 feet inside my recorded boundary, not 6. 12. No legal authorization for that placement exists in our system, she confirmed. No easement. No compensation agreement. No filing. Nothing. They hadn't revised anything. They had simply decided. For a moment, I felt heat rise in my chest, but I didn't explode. Exploding is emotional. Paper is permanent. I asked Marla what my options were. You can file a revocation of implied access, she said. If you ever granted temporary permission informally, you can formally revoke it. That handshake 5 years ago. Temporary access during construction. I nodded slowly. I drafted the document that afternoon. Revocation of implied access and encroachment notice. Clear language. Specific coordinates. Reference to the original plat. Demand for immediate cessation of encroachment and removal of unauthorized structures. I filed it with the county clerk. Paid the recording fee. Obtained the stamped copy. Then I sent certified notice to Briar Ridge Community Association. Return receipt required. Russell called me within 2 hours of signing for it. His tone was different. Less polished. Less certain. "Caleb," he began carefully, "I think this is an overreaction." "Is it?" I asked. "We've invested significant resources into that entrance. On my land." Silence. "We're willing to discuss compensation," he offered. That word hadn't existed in any of his previous letters. Compensation only shows up when leverage shifts. "You moved my fence," I said evenly. "I'm moving your entrance." There was a long pause on the line. "You wouldn't," he said finally. "I already have." He tried to pivot to negotiation, suggested a meeting. Suggested mediation. Suggested we avoid unnecessary conflict. Unnecessary. For weeks, they had escalated without hesitation. Now, suddenly, conflict was inconvenient. The legal notice provided a 6-day compliance window before I could enforce removal. 6 days. I spent them preparing. Licensed demolition contractor. Independent surveyor to restake original boundary. Formal notification to the county sheriff's office to prevent breach of peace. Everything documented. Everything lawful. On day 6, at exactly 8 in the morning, I scheduled demolition of the unauthorized encroachment. I signed the authorization form without shaking. They thought I was bluffing. I didn't tell anyone outside a small circle what I was planning. The demolition company I hired specialized in commercial stone removal. Licensed, bonded, meticulous. The owner, a man named Garrett, walked the frontage with me 2 days before the scheduled date. "You sure this is clean?" he asked quietly, tapping the survey stake. I handed him the recorded revocation and the original plat. "It's clean," I said, 12 feet clean. He nodded once. "Then we'll remove only what crosses that line. No more." That mattered. Precision is power. I brought in an independent surveyor to restake the original 1989 boundary. Bright pink flags marked the exact line from corner pin to road edge. Every measurement documented. Photographed. Logged. I notified the county sheriff's office of potential civil boundary enforcement to prevent what they call a breach of peace. I didn't accuse anyone of violence. I simply stated that removal of an unauthorized structure might draw protest. A deputy confirmed he'd be present. I installed 2 additional cameras facing the entrance frontage, not because I expected something dramatic, but because documentation wins arguments long after emotions fade. While I worked quietly, the HOA did the opposite. An email blast went out to every resident of Briar Ridge. Immediate threat to community assets. Unauthorized destruction of shared infrastructure. Urgent board action required. Marcus forwarded me the message. Russell had framed it as if I were planning to bulldoze a public park. By Wednesday night, they scheduled an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. The agenda item read, "Legal action against adjacent property owner for obstruction and damages." They still believed volume would replace validity. Another post appeared in the community group. Some individuals value personal pride over neighborhood stability. Pride. They were rewriting the narrative in real time. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't argue online. I let them escalate. Overconfidence is loud. Truth is quiet. Thursday evening, Marcus knocked on my door. He looked nervous. "I shouldn't be here long," he said. We stepped into my garage. He pulled folded pages from his jacket. Internal HOA email thread. Subject line, "Entrance realignment strategy." Russell wrote, "No easement on record, but revised survey interpretation gives us leverage." "Pressure compliance quickly before opposition mobilizes." Denise replied, "Agreed. If he resists, frame as obstruction of improvement initiative. Another board member added, once monument extension is poured, removal becomes unlikely. I read it twice. They knew. They knew there was no easement. They knew the boundary hadn't changed. Their strategy was to move fast and create permanence. Concrete cures faster than lawsuits. Why are you giving me this? I asked Marcus. He exhaled slowly. Because this isn't right. That email wasn't anger fuel. It was leverage. It confirmed intent. It confirmed awareness. It confirmed this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was calculated encroachment. I printed copies. One for my attorney. One for the deputy. One sealed for Friday morning. Friday arrived clear and cool. Demolition crew scheduled for 8 in the morning, survey stakes bright against the grass. Deputy arrival confirmed for 7:45. Equipment staged a block away. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. Another HOA blast email. Emergency community gathering at the entrance at 8:15 to address imminent destruction of shared property. Russell's signature at the bottom. He planned to rally residents 15 minutes after demolition was scheduled to begin. He wanted witnesses. He wanted pressure. He wanted to corner me publicly and push for a last-minute retreat. He believed optics would override legality. Demolition at 8. HOA gathering at 8:15. They thought they were staging a defense. They didn't realize they were staging exposure. Everything was aligned. Friday morning arrived quieter than I expected. The sky was pale blue. Cool air. The kind of calm that makes noise feel sharper. At 7:45, the sheriff's deputy pulled up and stepped out of his cruiser with measured ease. He shook my hand, reviewed the recorded revocation, and walked the flag boundary line himself. Looks clear from what I see, he said evenly. As long as nobody breaches the peace, this is a civil matter. At exactly 8 o'clock, Garrett's crew rolled in. Flatbed. Compact excavator. 2 workers in reflective vests. No drama. No raised voices. Just equipment and paperwork. And then the residents started gathering. First, a few curious neighbors standing on sidewalks. Then more. Phones already out, whispering. Pointing. By 8:10, there were at least 30 people lining the edge of the entrance road. Russell's SUV pulled up hard, tires crunching gravel. He stepped out without his usual composure. Jaw tight, shoulders squared. Denise followed in a separate vehicle, clutching a folder like a shield. "What do you think you're doing?" Russell demanded as he crossed toward me. "Enforcing my recorded boundary," I said calmly. Denise stepped forward. "We are seeking immediate injunction. You have no authority to remove community property." I handed her the stamped county recording. "I revoked access 6 days ago. No easement exists." Russell didn't look at the paper. He looked at the crowd. "Residents of Briar Ridge," he called out loudly, shifting tone instantly. "This individual is attempting to destroy shared infrastructure that benefits all of you." Phones lifted higher. Murmurs spread. He still believed he controlled the narrative. The deputy stepped between us slightly. "Sir," he said to Russell, "this appears to be a civil boundary dispute. If the structure encroaches onto his recorded property and there's no easement filed, he has the right to remove it." Russell's eyes narrowed. "That monument was built in good faith." "Good faith doesn't override deed lines," the deputy replied evenly. Denise leaned toward Russell and whispered something urgent. Russell straightened. "I call for an immediate community vote to authorize legal action," he announced loudly. "We will not allow unilateral destruction of community assets." He was trying to transform it into theater. But votes don't redraw plats. Garrett signaled to his crew. The excavator arm extended slowly toward the outermost stone cap. Russell stepped forward suddenly, planting himself between the machine and the monument. "This is illegal," he shouted. "You'll be liable for damages." The crowd went silent. I walked toward the deputy and handed him the folded internal HOA email Marcus had given me. "Before this goes further," I said quietly, "you might want to read that." The deputy unfolded the pages and scanned them. The air felt thinner. He read slower the second time. Then he looked up at Russell. "Is this your email address?" he asked, pointing to the printed header. Russell's face changed almost imperceptibly. "It's out of context," he said quickly. The deputy continued reading aloud just enough for those closest to hear. "No easement on record. Pressure compliance quickly before opposition mobilizes." Murmurs spread like wind through dry grass. Denise's grip on her folder tightened. Russell tried to recover. "We were operating under revised survey interpretation," he said, voice rising slightly. The deputy didn't argue. He simply folded the paper carefully. "If you knowingly authorized construction without recorded legal right-of-way," he said evenly, "that could complicate things." Complicate. That word carried weight. Russell's confidence cracked. For the first time since this began, he wasn't speaking from authority. He was reacting. The excavator operator looked toward Garrett for confirmation. Garrett looked at me. I nodded once. Russell opened his mouth, stepping forward again. As he opened his mouth to demand the crew stop, the first stone slab shifted. The first slab didn't crash. It shifted. A grinding scrape of stone against stone echoed across the entrance, louder than it should have been in the still morning air. Dust lifted in a soft cloud as the excavator eased the cap free with slow, deliberate precision. No chaos. No violence. Just removal. The monument that had framed Briar Ridge's identity for 5 years began coming apart the same way it had been built, piece by piece. Russell stepped back instinctively as the second slab lifted. The machine's hydraulic arm moved carefully, lowering the stone onto the flatbed like it was handling something fragile. In a way, it was. The illusion was fragile. Residents stood frozen. Some angry, faces tight with disbelief. Others silent, arms folded. A few whispered to each other, eyes darting between the deputy and Russell. The waterfall feature was next. Garrett's crew shut off the pump and disconnected the wiring before cutting through the decorative stone facing. As the front panel came down, the hidden plumbing was exposed. PVC pipes running directly over soil that county records showed as mine. The aesthetic vanished. All that remained were hoses, wires, and raw foundation. Landscaping crews began pulling ornamental shrubs from the extended bed. Root balls thudded onto tarps. Decorative lights were unplugged one by one, the neat symmetry dissolving into loose cords coiled on the ground. By 9:30, the monument no longer resembled an entrance. It looked like a dismantled stage set after a play ended. Russell's breathing had changed. Quicker, less measured. "You're destroying property that belongs to this community," he insisted, but the conviction in his voice was thinning. The deputy didn't raise his tone. "If there's no recorded easement and you knowingly authorized encroachment," he said quietly, "you may want to consult counsel before escalating this further." That word, knowingly, landed hard. Denise stepped backward slightly, creating distance without saying a word. The other board members who had arrived for the emergency gathering avoided eye contact entirely. Phones that were once recording an outrage now recorded in silence. At one point, a resident near the front called out, "Why wasn't this handled legally before construction?" No one answered. I stepped forward only when the largest center column was removed. The space where it once stood looked oddly open, bare. "Honest. I asked for my fence back," I said calmly, loud enough for the crowd to hear. That's all. Not revenge, not spectacle. A boundary. Russell tried to speak again, but the words didn't assemble the way they used to. The authority he leaned on for years had shifted underneath him. By 10:30, the waterfall basin was gone. By 11, the extended stone base was reduced to stacked slabs on the flatbed. Workers smoothed the exposed soil to match the original grade. At 11:45, only the core portion of the entrance that sat fully within HOA recorded land remained, smaller than before, less imposing. Legally contained. The deputy checked the survey stakes once more. "All removal appears confined to the encroachment area," he confirmed. No protest followed. No applause. Just stunned recalibration. The symbol of Briar Ridge's polished dominance had been dismantled without a single shouted insult. By noon, the last truck pulled away. The frontage was quiet again. 12 feet of reclaimed ground stretched between the remaining monument and my original boundary markers. Russell stood there longer than anyone else, staring at the space where expansion once stood. When he finally turned toward me, the shift was undeniable. "We need to discuss a resolution," he said carefully. "No accusation. No branding language. No threats of civil action. We're prepared to negotiate terms." Negotiate. He glanced at the deputy, then at the small crowd that had witnessed everything. For the first time since this started, he asked permission. The negotiation didn't take long once the dust settled. It's easier to talk when the leverage is visible. Within a week, attorneys drafted a formal settlement. The fence was rebuilt at the HOA's full expense, not vinyl, not redesigned, but restored exactly as it stood before they touched it. Rough cedar. Same height. Same line my father said decades ago. A formal, recorded easement was filed, clearly defined, significantly smaller than what they had tried to claim. Every inch documented. No ambiguity. No revisions. The monument footprint was reduced to sit entirely within that agreed space. In exchange for limited frontage access, the HOA agreed to monthly compensation at market frontage value, not symbolic. Real. They also issued written acknowledgement of boundary error, recorded with the county. The line had never moved. They had. The county reassessed my frontage taxes and refunded the overage tied to the unauthorized expansion period. Paper corrected paper. Russell remained president for less than 2 months after that morning. Pressure builds quietly in neighborhoods like Briar Ridge. Once residents saw the emails. Once they understood there had never been an easement. Once they realized they had nearly inherited a lawsuit because of pride disguised as improvement. The confidence in him dissolved. He resigned without ceremony. A new board was elected shortly after, one that implemented a transparent governance policy requiring recorded documentation before any structural project touching boundary lines. All survey revisions now require third-party verification. Funny how clarity becomes important once someone enforces it. Neighbors began waving again, not dramatically. Just small nods at first, then actual conversations. A couple even stopped to apologize for staying quiet. Marcus came by one evening with a six-pack and stood at the edge of the rebuilt fence. "You didn't just protect your land," he said. "You protected all of ours." I didn't answer right away. Because I hadn't set out to be anyone's defender. I just refused to move. They thought power came from votes and newsletters, from titles and meeting agendas. But power comes from paper, from patience, from knowing where your line truly is. My father used to say, "Land doesn't argue." People do. He was right. The ground never changed. Only the story around it did. Now, when cars pass that rebuilt entrance, smaller, contained, lawful, I know something most drivers don't. It stands there because I allow it. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fence Line Files. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?